Hey everybody, how you doing? This is our new lecture. By now you all should have gotten my strike message, but I also want to talk about the midterm exam, which I've gotten everybody except for one at this taping. So anyway, I basically said what the rules were. If you turn it in late, it's a full grade deduction for a 24-hour period. Then after that was an F. So I mean, I have to set some boundaries. So that's the way it is. Um, Anyway, let me just first say that I want to talk about the strike and I want to reemphasize the message that I sent out and also added a few things. So let me just actually go to the share screen here and basically this is actually not what you want to see. um what you want to see is this. You want to see actually my message and my amendments and additions to that message. And again, reemphasizing that that my dog just got loose, so yes. I just had to listen mention to my wife. Anyway, um, I just want to reemphasize that it's very important for people to know that I'm not going to penalize anybody for this for basically wanting to participate and sympathize, empathize, and align with the strike. I'm not, and basically by making these changes, I guess I'm aligning with the strike. But here's the deal, though. Okay, I'm going to be available free of charge to anybody who wants to finish the semester, and that's your choice. If you don't want to finish the semester, or while the strike is going on, or don't want to do the work, that's totally up to you. That's totally your choice. I respect your decision completely. I'm not anti-union at all. Okay. I just hadn't really sorted this out. So again, no one will be penalized if they choose not to participate in class, including turning in work, see below, when if a strike is called, which at this point is supposed to be the second week of April. I assign right now, up until that moment, a lot of times these strikes don't happen, and they get called off at the last hour. So I plan to continue to assign stories and keep the deadlines as if there won't be a strike. Now, some students I know apparently have complained to the union or people saying that I was planning to penalize students. Okay, so I realize that maybe I was not completely clear on that, and I apologize for that. That is patently false. Okay, um, all I said was basically I plan not to cancel the semester. Okay, basically I said I plan to complete the semester, finish the semester. I wasn't really sure how I was going to do that, to be honest with you. And that's probably the worst thing, as it says here about me, is I hadn't really sorted out the whole situation yet. So, um, in the back of my mind, what my biggest concern, and there wasn't, and maybe I just kicked the can down the road too long, was I did not want to have any students to be placed any kind of jeopardy. I have an in-person class, and I did not want them to be facing any kind of picketers or anything like that, or having to face a situation where they have to cross a picket line in order to go to a class or whatever, or even if it's a virtual picket line or whatever. Not even one student I want to be want I want to I don't want even one student to feel uncomfortable that way. Okay, so basically, if you want to finish the semester, you finish it, or do the work while the strike is going on. Maybe it'll end before the semester's over, or you just don't. And when the strike's over, we complete the work, we make it up. And that's it. Okay. Um, so here's my plan again. But I mean, but this is actually, I added to this since I first posted it. I will continue to post asynchronous lectures on Mondays, grade papers that are turned in, and move on from there. If you choose not to participate, you can make up the work when the strike ends, and that's fine. Now, I'd be honest with you, I'm getting vagaries from both sides. I mean, one of the things that's going to throw me off is, will there even be picket lines? Where will they be? I mean, a lot of stuff I've been asking. I've been asking whether this strike is illegal because it's for state employees. I'm not getting a lot of straight answers, I got to say, from both sides. Okay. So, so I don't know what to tell you about that. Okay. I will deliver the asynchronous lectures by email only. Okay. I'll respect the union's requests and not post any new assignments to Canvas. Okay. Which will affect what we do here, okay? Because I have actually posted all of the assignments except for one already So that's the next point. All the semester's assignments, except for the final exam, will be posted on Canvas by the time the strike starts. But again, it's up to you whether you want to participate during the work action. Okay. Now, the final exam is the only one that hasn't been posted. So, I mean, if the strike happens to last maybe the rest of the semester, I may even consider just canceling the final exam. Okay, altogether, and then your only grades would be the midterm and the oral presentation, even if the strike ends. Okay, it all depends on how long it goes. So that's just one of the possibilities I'm considering, is not even just canceling the final exam altogether. Okay. Um, I mean, they had a strike in California lasted 32 days. That essentially would be more than the end. I would go past the end of the semester here. So, anyway, so I will deliver those via email. Okay, those lectures. It's up to you. I mean, right now, I mean, at this point, I don't really have a lot more to add anyway in terms of lecturing, because I just want to help guide you on your oral presentations, you know, when, so you can get them done and done well, by the time of the deadline. But again, that is a deadline. That oral presentation deadline is in the middle of this, what could be the strike period. And if you choose not to participate in the class, you do not have to give me the oral presentation while the strike action is going on. Okay, it's totally your choice. Okay. All right. So I just want to make that emphatically clear. Okay. So, all right. So let's talk about the really kind of awkward segue here, the midterm exam. Okay. And I gave it a lot of A's on this. I got to say, there was a lot of people who did well. I'm not really, wasn't really, like I said, I wasn't looking to agree with people. I mean, I did find one argument that was made about it was that I felt was just didn't make any sense at all. So that person was actually deducted points. It didn't have anything to do with how I felt about the argument or my personal opinions. But let me just show you the exam right here, an example of an exam that worked. This was interesting. The first one was where I found people had the most troubles, and actually this is where I found myself deducting points. But people still got A's even with deducting points. And they talked about this in the lectures, and I had talked about this when we talked about the Potter's box. It was lecture two dealt with the ethical principles. The ethical principles were essentially the principles that were essentially written and expounded by people who were like the ancient Greek philosophers, etc., German philosophers, etc., but also even your modern day philosophers, if you want to call them that, like your Bob Woodards of the world, who basically sets some sort of moral and ethical standard that journalists, producers, people in the media, entertainment media, whatever, live by. Okay, and that is actually one of the things that's in the Potter's box. So, as it says here, what I wanted to do is I wanted people to essentially just identify the parts of the Potter's box. See, right here, the Potter's box is a method to formulate a way of making ethical decision, encouraging research and the use of different ethical principles. Okay. So basically it starts off, and this person actually, this student actually blended it together, because that was another thing. One person actually didn't even include a case. That was an important thing, was that you had a media case that was part of the answer, and that we ran through the Potter's box. I didn't expect like a fully detailed a fully detailed, I expect extensively detailed, I should say, answer to this question as far as the media case running through the Potter's box, because just as long as you were able to identify it, the different steps and how they apply. Okay, so the empirical definition essentially was defining it. Okay, and this person actually used the case that was identified in the book, and it was the KHAU Firestone Tires case. Because again, the ethical question raised there was whether, to actually proceed with this story based on like some just, initial complaints that seemed to come out of nowhere. Okay. Next step in Potter's box was essentially identifying values, what I called like you said, this person used my words, checking the gut. And, basically they're checking the gut was the reporters had to at least acknowledge, be generous enough to, it's not showing generosity as your gut check, your personal value there, and actually like taking this case to the next step. Okay. And and actually proceeding with it. Okay, it says journalism of the KHU case then had to examine ethics, the ethical principles, and this particular student used utilitarianism. That's an ethical principle from John Stuart Mill, where they essentially the greater good is people. There's a greater good that comes out of it than what you're doing is ethically moral. Okay. So basically, the person proceeded because they felt like the ends justify the means, that there'll be some sort of greater good of come out of it, even if the initial evidence was perhaps thin. Okay. And then the loyalty is looking at like, basically like who essentially might come in conflict with your own personal loyalties or the loyalties of people or your sources. The decision was basically made that this person basically felt that there was actually essentially no conflict. And basically the ultimate, and this was left out too, is the decision. Decision basically was to actually continue and proceed with the case based on everything we just talked about, that it was greater good was coming out of it, that it was generous for the reporter to actually proceed with this case and hustle and actually try to get more out of it. And that there was actually no potential conflicts of interest involving the reporter or the sources. The sources had like worked with Firestone, for instance, or maybe like worked for organization that was opposed to tire making or something like that. Okay. Or rubber or whatever. Okay. And then, but again, one of the things, the ethical principles, I mean, like I said, some people just left out that they would say like the ethical principle is justice. Well, I mean, that's a very loosely based ethical principle. It's not one of the ones we discussed in class. The ethical principles would be like the golden mean, okay, utilitarianism, okay. That's what I was looking for in terms of it, or even like what Bob Woodward said, the saying that he said that reporters should seek the most obtainable version of the truth. That was the sort of ethical principle that's almost, it can be nailed to a wall or chiseled to a wall, that I was looking for. Okay, that I've gone over in class and I've talked in lectures, and I also went over in the I'm sorry, my dog is chewing something. I guess got this new dog. He's very cute. That also I talked about in the exam, the pre-review of the exam. Okay. All right, so the next one dealt with essentially the Onion and why the Onion could be considered moral, and maybe in making up stories, and essentially why the mainstream media and doing maybe similar things, printing falsehoods, whatever, or even making up stories would not be. The reason that the Onion's fabrication of sources is ethical, while mainstream's falsehoods are unethical, can be attributed, in this reference, actually cited an ethical principle, social contracts. Basically, the audience saying that the audience expects the Onion to actually to print false stories and laugh and that sort of thing. So there's an expectation there. But it's interesting because like I go back, and I might have said this already, but back in the day when Jon Stewart did the Daily Show, it was considered fake news, but he would essentially mock the news. It wasn't like fake, but a lot of people actually got their news that way. And they would get it by extension, essentially. He would mock it, he would make fun of it, he would make up jokes, he would make up stuff. But people would at least learn some general idea what was going on during the Obama administration, the Bush administration, the Iraq war, that sort of thing. Actually, we gave them some sort of idea what was going on. But the Onion is a straight out just making up. The audience has certain expectations for what they got. Now, there was one strange answer where somebody like criticized the Onion for putting out fake news based on the fact that they put out fake news, and they didn't offer any kind of justification for why the mainstream media is wrong for putting out fake news. So there was no side of that, talking about like this person talks about Jason Blair was putting out fake news. There's a certain expectation the New York Times is going to print the truth. So, so that's why that would be considered, and that's a good case example. There was a lot of people who actually also use general examples like news or something like that. I was looking for a specific case like Jason Blair, the reporter from the New York Times, who actually did print fake news. Okay. So that's a certain expectation that the audience does not want fake news from the New York Times. Okay. But the Onion's expectations, that's what that was the argument I was talking about. That the argument to me didn't make any sense because the Onion's audience expects it to put out fake news. If they put out real news, the audience would feel like it was being tricked or something. Okay, so and then the opposite effect would happen. They'd be wondering what the hell they're buying. They're not getting their bang for their buck. Okay, so that was basically the basic difference right there. Okay. The next one was the changing media landscape. I saw a lot of this. A lot of people talked about how, I mean, maybe that has it gotten worse or better. A lot of people talked about the social media, especially TikTok, got a lot of mentions. While the media shift from largely providing news via professional news networks like CBS News to apps like TikTok, comes the increased emphasis on impartiality. Social media accounts that report news often do so from an extremely biased perspective, only providing one specific point of view and inserting personal opinions into content, for example. So basically, this person's saying that essentially, like, your social media takeover has kind of like led to this kind of like opinionation, if you want to call it opinionization, I'm sorry, of the news. Because it's basically kind of like allowed certain people who might not necessarily get the journalism diploma to take control and express their views in a certain way. My daughter was, for a very long time, was very much a follower of TikTok, got a lot of her news that way, and kind of shaped her own perspective on things. Now she actually just got rid of TikTok, and I'm not saying it's bad or good to have TikTok. I'm just saying that this actually seemed to come a lot that a bunch of people felt that like TikTok was shaping the news in a very opinionated way, and that was not good or objective, and therefore not ethical, not for the greater good. So I felt bringing up TikTok and CBS News was a good example because a specific example and basically how things have changed. I mean, the opposite argument I would accept too, and the opposite argument perhaps would be again that back in the day when you had only a couple of news organizations that actually would give news, like CBS, ABC, and NBC, that was also very limiting itself because a lot of people weren't getting news that they should have known or they should have gotten. A lot of the things, especially things in terms of social justice, I mean, even as recently, it's recently like for me, the 90s. I mean, a lot of the stuff that was talked about in the 90s about, especially like a lot of stuff that Hillary Clinton was saying, or even Joe Biden was saying about incarceration and things like that. We now look back in perspective and we say, wow, why didn't people call them out for that? And that's because the news was very limiting at the time. The crime bill that was passed in the 90s that incarcerated many, many people. Now they're saying that basically that was, there was some good that came out of that bill, but a lot of bad came out of that bill because we shouldn't just like throw people in jail to solve problems. So, but there wasn't a lot of like actually like alternative perspective at the time to provide that. So, all forms of news media can be considered legitimate watchdogs. I mean, that one I was almost kind of putting on a T for you. This person actually like was saying basically like actually TikTok can be used for recreational. However, when it comes to influencers, the app's users closely monitor their content and hold them accountable for wrongdoing. So there is good in TikTok too, in his social media and Facebook and things like this. So that's actually one of the things that came up like 10 years ago when Facebook was really like the thing. And they talk about how there was a lot of changes in the countries in Northern Africa and the Middle East. Largely because they were getting information from Facebook that they weren't getting from before, in these certain countries, that sort of thing. And it led to a lot of change. Muammar Gaddafi, he met a certain fate. He was the dictator of Libya, people like that. So the things changed and there was a lot of good that came out of it. And it says here that I guess there's certain self-policing that goes on with like TikTok. It says here, beauty influencer James Charles responded to the outpouring of criticism from TikTokers. This is particularly this question. I guess he made this from a question remarks about dating younger women in an interview, and then he posted an apology video. If not for the ability of the users to comment freely, post in response to controversy, this wouldn't have happened. Essentially, okay. And of course, I said you could repeat answers. So the Washington Post coverage of the Watergate scandal, the classic watchdog example, which is mentioned in the book, and I talked in class. That is obviously, another good example of you know, the watchdog, because it basically, forced the president out of office. Okay. Now we're seeing Trump get indicted. And a lot of that came about because of reporting, good reporting. And a lot of people criticize the media, and I got a lot of things I could criticize the media for the way they handled the Trump administration. Giving him a lot of free passes and kind of like almost like giving him, because for 40 years he's been, or even longer, he's been like in the news for so long. He's a celebrity, and it felt like there was a lot of coverage, was even the coverage that was essentially negative, was still had a kind of a celebrity kind of twist to it. It's more about sensationalism and that sort of thing. So but there was a lot of good reporting that came out about his taxes, things like that. The Stormy Daniels case that where he I guess he had a sexual relationship with a topless dancer or something, that actually led to essentially like a possible election fraud. He's being charged with. That came out because of reporting, etc. Okay. And then number 5 here, again, a classic Watergate again, is appropriate to use anonymous sources. Again, anonymous sources were at the center, the heart of the Watergate case. As it talks about here, reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein used an anonymous source called Deep Throat, as really more Bob Woodward directly. It was a deep background source, which meant that he was never quoted, he was never identified. In fact, when he did use stuff from him directly, it was either like stuff off the record that they would confirm via somebody else. They would get the off record information, go to somebody else and get it on the record, or they would just print the information without any source. So because they were afraid that, like, if they said according to a source, people would know what that source was. So that is the classic, anonymous source case that worked. Well, some people actually use a case where anonymous sources didn't work. They used the Janet Cook case, where they use anonymous sources, that sort of thing, basically, but it turned out it was a totally false story. And then the editors, Ben Bradley of Washington Post, that sort of thing, were trusted that the anonymous source was legit when actually it was like totally made up. So you have to be really, like, it is actually a good idea to, even if you have a situation like this where you have legitimate reporters and using legitimate sources, that maybe that editors do their due diligence and make sure they maybe actually even try to find out who those sources are, if they are legitimate, and that they can trust them. Apparently they didn't do that with the Janet Cook case. That's where she made up the case of the child that was on heroin. So anyway, all right. So that is the midterm exam. Everybody should gotten all their grades, but everybody got all their grades back. And thank you. Excellent job on that. Many A's I gave out. So appreciate that. So again, I mean, there's also the extra credit that's also posted. So remember that. I haven't seen anybody actually contribute to that yet. So that's the deal. I mean, this could be the last lecture posted to Canvas, but not the last lecture for the semester, but we'll see. But I will continue to operate as though we're going to continue the semester. Maybe by the time, it's time for me to post the next lecture, we'll have an idea, because that is supposed to be the second week of April. I thank everybody for the participation so far. Again, I want to reiterate that we'll finish the semester one way or another. But again, if you want to finish the semester after the strike is over, that's up to you. If you want to finish the semester during the strike, that's up to you. So anyway, that's it. Thanks very much, everybody. And I will be talking to you, and let me know if you have any questions at all or concerns.